The brutality of this crime was that she was being raped while she was dying.
On July 9th, 2002, officers from the New Mexico Police Department were called for a welfare check at the home of Marioara Shand, but what should have been a routine welfare check would lead to a far more sinister discovery: a dead body.
I could see blood everywhere, along the walls, on the floors. There was hardly any place in that room that wasn't covered with blood.
A few days later, on July 13th, another chilling murder was reported just a few blocks away from the first.
What this woman went through was absolutely horrible. She had 19 stab wounds.
Desperate to catch the killer before he struck again, the police launched an all-out investigation.
My concern was that we were dealing with a serial killer, and he was targeting single women.
But all their clues led nowhere until a mysterious caller revealed something that left them speechless.
911 emergency.
Okay, I wanted to report somebody.
Okay, what's going on?
I heard about that lady that was murdered in Rancho.
Yeah.
And we did it.
911 call had come in to the Taos Central Dispatch, and they had advised that there was a female in this apartment complex, that her vehicle had not moved. They were concerned and requested a welfare check.
Officers were informed that Marioara was last seen returning home on the evening of July 6, 2002. Their suspicions were further raised when she failed to report for work at a local hotel on July 7th and 8th. Neighbors explained that missing shifts at work was uncharacteristic for their reliable neighbor. From the outside, Marioara's apartment looked undisturbed, but as officers approached the front door, they noticed bloodstains on the door handle. Their senses were on high alert, and they entered the apartment. On the floor leading towards the living room, officers found bloody shoe prints and took notice of the blood splatter on the tiled walls. The carnage in front of them indicated a struggle had taken place.
There was a large amount of blood on the floor. There was blood on the walls. It was a very brutal crime scene.
Moving into the bedroom, officers discovered the body of Marioara lying on the floor in a pool of blood. She'd been wearing a light gown over a t-shirt and appeared to have been stabbed several times in the abdomen. There was also a visible slash across her neck.
In addition to that, we did notice some defensive wounds on her hands as well, from appearance of a blade, a sharp instrument.
Officers reported their findings and requested a medical examiner and crime scene investigators to begin collecting evidence. At the crime scene, investigators were joined by New Mexico State Police Agent Chad Davis and Taos District Attorney Donald Gallegos. One of the first things investigators noticed was that there was no sign of forced entry. This could only mean that Marioara knew her killer. On the floor just outside the bedroom door, marks made by what appeared to be someone slipping barefoot in blood, along with smears on the doorframe, showed that Marioara tried to escape from her attacker. However, she was ultimately overpowered.
He then gained entry into the bedroom and violently attacked her with a sharp instrument, cutting her and stabbing her numerous times, creating multiple patterns throughout the room.
While looking through the house, investigators realized nothing had been disturbed. Marioara's personal belongings, including her purse and jewelry, were left untouched. Investigators also found a receipt for cleaning supplies purchased on July 6, 2002, the last day anyone saw Marioara. The position in which Marioara was found made it quite clear that she'd likely suffered the worst of fates before her murder.
Her legs had been spread open, and it would indicate she was sexually assaulted as well.
When officers prepared to move Marioara's body, they discovered another vital clue.
Under the head of Marioara Shand, there was a man's watch. And that watch is definitely critical evidence.
The investigators believed that whomever murdered Marioara had lost the watch during the struggle. Having collected all the evidence they needed, investigators moved to the next stage of the case, questioning the neighbors. They needed to learn everything they possibly could about Marioara Shand.
Sometimes things that, however small or minute to the neighbor, are huge to our investigation.
Marioara was born on August 26, 1965 in Serbia, formerly Yugoslavia. After completing high school, Marioara relocated to New York and worked as a nanny. In the late 1980s, she was hired by Gulf Airlines as a flight attendant and made the move to Bahrain in the Middle East.
She was a traveler. She loved to see the world. She was always up for an adventure.
While living and working in Bahrain, Marioara met her future husband, Mike Shand, a U.S. Navy fighter pilot. After a whirlwind romance, they married and moved to Hanford, California in 1990. However, their happiness was short-lived as Mike was killed in a car accident in 1996. Through this difficult period in her life, Marioara found love once more. Michael Edmonds, a mutual friend of both Marioara and Mike, developed a close bond with her. Michael decided to move to Taos, New Mexico to begin a new life with Marioara. Initially, their relationship thrived, but in time, Marioara's need for independence won out. She eventually moved out on her own and lost contact with Michael. It was during her search for independence and freedom that she found the house that she was living in when tragedy struck. Her landlord and the other neighbors had comforted her in her time of need, and eventually it seemed things were looking up. But it was then that her neighbors noticed her absence, which led to the horrific discovery. Apart from Marioara's inactivity, neighbors hadn't taken notice of anything strange that occurred over the weekend. It was only when Marioara's landlord, Edward Duran, and his grandson, 17-year-old Nathaniel Duran, spoke to police did they learn of a possible person of interest. Nathaniel told officers to investigate a 19-year-old man named Mitchell Rhodes.
Nathaniel advised that Mitchell was behaving very strangely and suspiciously.
Nathaniel had said, well, maybe he knows something.
He told officers that Mitchell was no stranger to the law and had been involved in other crimes in the area. Armed with a name, officers began searching for Mitchell. In the meantime, the results of the autopsy were ready. Officers found the information disturbing to process. Marioara had been stabbed 8 times in the abdomen, and her neck was slashed twice. The wounds on her hands and arms showed that she put up a fight. There was also evidence of an assault, and male DNA had been found on her body. Ultimately, the cause of death was due to blood loss. What disturbed investigators was that the coroner explained that Marioara had been assaulted while she was dying. Determined to find Marioara's killer, investigators made contact with Mitchell Rhodes and brought him in for questioning. Mitchell denied knowing Marioara, but his recollection of his whereabouts on the weekend of July 7th and 8th, 2002 had investigators growing suspicious.
He gave dates that he would change. He gave locations that were not consistent. And he would say that he couldn't really recall the dates or times specifically.
But then he said something that made the officers even more suspicious.
We started questioning him or trying to get more detailed on dates and times of his whereabouts. He said that his watch had broke.
Okay. I'm not too good about keeping days. Man. Okay. I noticed you have a watch that you will lose from. Is that how you guys wear the watches? I got my, she just made us about a week ago.
This definitely raised our suspicions that he may be the owner of the watch found under Marioara's body.
Believing they may have just found their suspect, officers asked Mitchell to provide a DNA sample for testing. But just as investigators believed they were closing in on a possible suspect, there was another shocking and unexpected twist in the case. On the morning of July 14th, 2002, Emily Martinez tried calling her daughter LeAnne, but there was no answer. Emily wasn't immediately concerned, as LeAnne may have overslept after a late night out. But as the day dragged on and there was no contact from LeAnne, Emily started to get worried. She then contacted her eldest daughter, Valerie, who had also not heard from LeAnne. Both women agreed to drive out to LeAnne's house with LeAnne's daughter, Estrella, later that afternoon to check up on her. As they approached the house, their feeling of unease grew stronger. LeAnne's Ford Mustang wasn't parked in front of the house in its usual spot. Emily told Valerie to wait in the car with Estrella while she went ahead to check if LeAnne was at home. The front door was unlocked, and Emily made her way down the hallway before pushing open the bedroom door. On the floor, she discovered LeAnne's lifeless body and ran out of the house before calling the police.
And I just got this horrible feeling, and I opened the door and I looked in and I saw a body. It was like my world was just turned inside out, upside down. That was the most horrifying thing I've ever had to endure.
On the evening of July 14th, 2002, New Mexico State Police were called to the residence of 22-year-old LeAnne Martinez. When they received the call, the detectives immediately realized that LeAnne lived only a few blocks away from Marioara, increasing their fears that the murders were connected.
Another murder occurred, and within a short distance from Marioara Shand's murder.
So now part of the discussion was, do we have a serial murderer?
Both of them were single females who were living alone. The injuries were consistent.
As investigators entered the home, they noticed something telling.
We're looking for any damage to the exterior of the house or any of the windows, indicating that a suspect or suspects may have gained entry at that point. The locks were intact. There were no visible pry marks that would indicate a forced entry.
This meant that LeAnne had known the person who attacked her. Moving through the living room, officers saw that the house looked lived in, but didn't appear to be ransacked. On the coffee table was a half-eaten TV dinner and an open soda can. There was no sign of a struggle in the living room, but as they walked through the kitchen, they found a partial bloody shoe print.
You could tell by looking at the pattern of the linoleum that it was part of the heel of a shoe or a boot imprint.
We can tell type of shoe the suspect may have been wearing. We can tell size. Also, what blood may be on that shoe. Is it LeAnne's or was it the killer's?
The kitchen led off to the main bedroom, and on the floor at the foot of the bed lay the lifeless body of LeAnne. She was unclothed except for a sock on her right foot. Her hands were raised above her head as if she'd surrendered to her attacker, indicating something heinous had taken place.
The way that the body appeared, it's quite possibly a criminal sexual penetration. We could have had a rape that occurred prior to the murder.
She'd been stabbed multiple times in the chest and also had a deep wound on her neck. The contents of her purse had been emptied on the bed, but nothing had been taken. Investigators were told that the only thing missing was LeAnne's 2001 red Ford Mustang. Apart from the stolen car, the similarities between Marioara and LeAnne's murders were eerily similar. Both women appeared to have been the intended targets. They were both assaulted and stabbed to death. There is no sign of a robbery at either scene and no sign of forced entry. They lived within walking distance of each other and had been home alone on the nights of their respective murders. Investigators needed to find out more about LeAnne Martinez to see if there was a link between the murders. Born on February 20th, 1980, LeAnne was the middle child of Leo and Emily Martinez. She was raised alongside her older sister Valerie and younger brother Vinny in Taos, New Mexico. LeAnne was known for being extremely hardworking, funny, and having a deep love for her family. But her life would change when she turned 19. LeAnne discovered she was pregnant. Her then-boyfriend, Javier, was not interested in committing to a relationship, so LeAnne decided to have the baby and raise the child on her own. Estrella was born in March 1999, and with the help of her family, LeAnne managed to give her daughter all the love she needed. LeAnne worked hard and was able to buy herself a 2001 red Ford Mustang, her dream car, and find a home for herself in Estrella. LeAnne also found love again with a local man named Ashton. But just as life was starting to look up for LeAnne, her future had been tragically snuffed out. On the evening of July 13th, 2002, LeAnne had a rare night off. She'd planned to visit the nearby town of Espanola with her friend Julie for the Fiestas, a musical festival. LeAnne's mother, Emily, had agreed to babysit Estrella for the night, and LeAnne would fetch Estrella the next day. The police brought Julie in for an interview to see if she could reveal to them any information that could be of use in their investigation. Julie mentioned something that had happened after the festival that raised suspicions for the detectives. LeAnne had met up with her boyfriend Ashton after the fiesta, but not everything had been rosy between the two.
We just stopped there and we stayed in the car. She stayed talking to him for a while and they kind of got in an argument and then we just left.
You know what the argument was about?
Just because he was kind of acting stupid, I guess.
And everything to do about smoking marijuana?
Yeah.
That was what it was?
Yeah. It was just about drugs. She was just mad because he was acting stupid and she could tell.
The boyfriend having an argument with her that evening and her leaving upset was definitely of interest to us.
Had this argument escalated into something far more sinister later that night? The officers now had a new lead to look into, and when they spoke to LeAnne's family, they learned more concerning information regarding Ashton.
We really urged her to kind of break away from him. They had a rough relationship, to put it nicely, and I didn't trust him. And so I kind of thought he might be involved.
This was enough for the detectives. The next day, they brought Ashton down to the station for an interrogation, but his answers perplexed the detectives.
As we went through his whereabouts, all the events that transpired that evening, his statements closely resembled those of LeAnne's friend who she was with that evening.
His story had matched with what Julie had already told them. He insisted that he did not kill LeAnne and provided investigators with a sample of his DNA for testing. Without much more useful information from Ashton, he was allowed to go home. Until the DNA test results were returned, the investigators began to look into other leads. As investigators pieced together LeAnne's final hours, the results of her autopsy were made available. The coroner confirmed that LeAnne had been assaulted and male DNA had been found on her body. She was also stabbed in the neck and chest. But the autopsy report also revealed another horrifying detail.
It revealed that she had 19 stab wounds. He had stabbed her through the chest, and the results showed that that blade was rocked back and forth, causing slices into the heart. So the brutality of this crime was that she was being raped while she was dying.
Investigators were left stunned by the cruelty of the attack. The similarities between both Marioara and LeAnne's murders were striking, and it was decided that both cases were to be investigated together. With the news of a second murder within a week, the fears of the investigation team had started to take root in the community of Taos. Rumors of a possible serial killer targeting single women spread like wildfire, and the once serene town was being suffocated by fear.
Is there going to be another one, in another week?
My concern was that we were dealing with a serial killer.
Tensions were really high, and people were on high alert.
Investigators questioned the family and friends of both Marioara and LeAnne to try and find a connection between the two women. However, both women had never met each other despite living in such close proximity. Furthermore, new information discovered during both investigations had officers looking at different suspects. The result of Mitchell Rhodes's DNA test revealed that it was no match to the DNA found on Marioara. However, colleagues who were questioned about her personal life pointed investigators towards another possible person of interest, Michael Edmonds. According to Marioara's friends, the couple had initially lived together in harmony, but over time, they'd started to have very heated arguments.
Given the violence of this crime, the brutality, we were looking at a crime of passion. It would make Michael Edmonds a person of interest for us. We certainly wanted to interview him.
Given the nature of Marioara's murder, investigators believed it could have been a crime of passion and executed a search warrant on Michael's home.
I had to be escorted if I wanted to go to the bathroom. I was told to sit in the living room, and these other guys went through the house.
What the officers were really wanting to see is could you match, could you corroborate any of the evidence at the scene with anything that may be found in Mr. Edmonds' house? Is there a receipt showing the type of watch that may have been purchased? Is there a box? Watches typically come in a kind of box. Are there photographs? Are there photographs of him and her? Are there photographs of him showing him wearing a watch? What kind of shoes Does he wear athletic shoes? If so, are they the type sole pattern that matches?
While officers searched his home, investigators questioned Michael about his relationship with Marioara. Michael admitted that he and Marioara did have very heated arguments, but insisted he would not have resorted to murder. Officers confiscated old watch boxes and shoes to test against the evidence found at the crime scene. Michael was also asked to provide a DNA sample for testing.
It was at this time that the investigators were also looking at LeAnne's new boyfriend, Ashton, as a possible person of interest. His DNA was also collected and sent for testing during this process.
As investigators waited for the results of both Michael and Ashton's DNA tests, Marioara's family arrived in New Mexico to claim her body for burial in Sweden. The Martinez family also laid LeAnne to rest in a ceremony attended by hundreds of people from across the United States who had come to know LeAnne in her short life.
Investigators were hopeful that the results would bring closure to both families. However, when the results were returned, they were a huge blow to the investigation. They confirmed that neither Michael nor Ashton was responsible for the murders.
It was back to square one for the investigation team, but for Michael, being considered a suspect was a bitter pill to swallow.
Someone even thinking that I would do anything like that, it pissed me off, frankly, that they had such little respect for me as an individual.
It was a few days after LeAnne's murder that investigators got a new lead. LeAnne's neighbor, Joseph Steele, contacted police with information about an unfamiliar man he'd seen on the night of LeAnne's murder. He explained that he was disturbed by his dogs barking in the yard and looked out the window.
I remember it was like a beige color shirt, and the shirt had like little square designs on it. He walked about 5 feet away from my bedroom window. That's what kind of spooked me. I believe he was between 5'9", 5'11", about 200 to 220 pounds, if I remember, in that area. His head was shaved. I watched him till he got all the way across the other field. I never saw him again. In fact, I didn't even know about the murder till the next day.
The man Joseph described to investigators was obviously not Ashton, as many initially suspected. He could have been anyone from within the Taos community. But the news coverage of the murders had paid off, and another new lead was about to unravel the mystery of the missing Mustang. This lead came from a resident in Albuquerque, New Mexico. A red Ford Mustang had been abandoned near a middle school and matched the description of LeAnne's missing car. Forensic teams were dispatched to Albuquerque to examine the car.
Crime scene team did find traces of blood in the vehicle.
They were able to lift some fingerprints from the car. Hopefully, we're going to be able to match those to a suspect.
This evidence was huge. Obviously, we may possibly have evidence left behind from our killer.
However, a third and unexpected lead was about to put a new name on the suspect list. A woman named Dawn contacted the investigation team after hearing about LeAnne's murder.
LeAnne Martinez was a very good friend of mine. We went to school all through junior high and high school, and that's why it was a shock to me when I found out.
Dawn went on to explain that her cousin, 23-year-old Richard Fresquez, had visited her unexpectedly on the afternoon of July 14, 2002.
What had caught her attention was that Richard was driving a new car.
He showed up Sunday afternoon and he said, "Hey, check out my new car."
What was he driving?
He was driving a red Mustang. So I said, "Hey, cool." Your friends want to lend you their car. And yes, it's fine. He acted totally normal.
Could this red Mustang have been LeAnne's missing vehicle? Dawn went on to tell officers that Richard had then made a strange comment about his shoes that she'd not thought much of then, but now seemed suspicious to her.
He was wearing some dingy old tennis shoes. He says, "Oh, I wish I could buy a new pair of shoes. Mine are all old." So we took off to a shoe store and we all walked out with a new pair of shoes.
After getting himself a new pair of shoes, they returned to Dawn's house. Richard threw out his old shoes in the trash. The next morning, he told Dawn that he was going to visit relatives in California and drove off in the Mustang. Working with the new information, officers searched through the trash cans at Dawn's house. It would prove to be a treasure trove of evidence.
Not only did they find the tennis shoes with specks of dried blood on them, but also the brown plaid shirt that LeAnne's neighbor Joseph had seen the stranger wearing the night of the murder.
APB was issued for Richard. Investigators informed California law enforcement agencies and the media about being on the lookout for Richard, as he was a person of interest in a double murder investigation. Investigators were now looking at Richard very closely. Not only was he their most likely suspect in LeAnne's murder, but there was also a possibility he could be responsible for Marioara's death. As the shoes and dirt were sent away for DNA testing, investigators began looking for connections between Richard and the victims. A search of Richard's home revealed that he and LeAnne did share several mutual friends. Photos found in his home also showed that he'd attended several parties at LeAnne's house. Valerie, LeAnne's sister, confirmed that they'd known Richard, but were not particularly close to him.
During those 7 years, have you ever known your sister and he to have any problems?
It wasn't a close relationship by any means.
Okay. There was never any romantic relationship in between Richard
God,
and...
no.
Okay.
No.
And do you know whether or not Richard was ever allowed to use her vehicle?
No. Never.
Never.
With one connection confirmed, investigators now looked for a link between Marioara and Richard. On a hunch, investigators visited the hotel where Marioara had worked to see if the two had met in passing. It so happened that a month before Marioara's murder, Richard had stayed at the hotel,
saying that the arrival date was June 8, 2002. He checked in at 4:54 p.m. The departure date was 6/9/02.
They also showed the cleaning room details and that Marioara Shand had cleaned the room after Richard Fresquez had stayed at the hotel.
Yet another connection between the two was made by a man who employed Richard to do some construction work at the church near Marioara's apartment complex. With the connection coming together, investigators eagerly awaited the results of the blood test to prove Richard's link to both murders. On July 20th, 2002, Richard was arrested in Palm Desert, California by U.S. Marshals. He was extradited back to Taos, New Mexico, where Agent Chad Davis sat down to interrogate him. Armed with the results of the blood found in the car and the shoes and shirt found in the trash, Davis hoped to finally put the cases of Marioara Shand and LeAnne Martinez to rest.
The only problem was that the blood on the shoes and the car only matched LeAnne
and not Marioara.
Let me ask you a few questions because there was and I'm sure you're aware of it too, there was another murder that had taken place in Taos, Marioara Shand, that happened in that little church plaza right there.
Yeah, I mostly stayed away from the church area myself, out of respect.
So let's say in June or July, were you ever in that plaza?
No.
Davis questioned Richard about his whereabouts on the weekend of July 7th and 8th, 2002. Richard denied having any involvement in Marioara's murder, claiming he'd not been anywhere near the plaza where she was murdered. Without any solid evidence to link him to the murder of Marioara, Davis then switched to questioning him about LeAnne. Again, Richard denied his involvement in LeAnne's murder as well and opted to push blame onto another person.
Why don't you tell me about how you came into possession of her vehicle?
I was out partying. I drank all night with some friends. I met up with this guy that I've known for years.
He gave you the car?
Yeah. So I was like, are you sure? He's like, yeah, well, meet me in Albuquerque. Here's money for gas, here's everything.
Okay.
I was still scared, man. You gotta understand where I'm coming from. I really freaked out. And then what would you do in my situation? Your face is plastered all over the news.
LeAnne was one of your friends?
Yes, I went to school with her. That's why I freaked out when everything happened on the news. I was like, what?
Had you seen her that night?
Not at all. I hadn't seen her in a couple weeks.
He refused to admit anything.
Agent Martinez has gone out. He's done a lot of background stuff, and we know what kind of guy you are, okay? At this point, let me go ahead and tell you, you did cause the death of LeAnne Martinez, okay? We know that, and let me explain. Hold on, let me finish.
Let me tell you, brother. We didn't come in here empty-handed. I have a pair of shoes that we've done DNA on, and guess whose DNA is on those shoes? Whose? You think about that, okay? Because we're giving you a chance to help yourself. Because you know what? Yes, you are going to go back to prison.
So tell us what happened. We want to hear your side. We want to get this cleared up, and I think you can help us out. Tell me what happened. It's all right, we're on your side.
I want to have an attorney present.
What's that?
I want to have an attorney present.
Okay, so you don't want to talk to us no more?
I need to talk to an attorney first.
Okay. We're done.
He thereafter requested a lawyer, which effectively ended the interrogation. Richard was asked to provide a DNA sample for further testing. Officers placed Richard under arrest for a past parole violation while they awaited the results of the DNA analysis. When investigators finally received the results, it was both a triumph and a defeat. The DNA found on LeAnne was a match to Richard. However, it did not match the DNA found on Marioara. Richard Fresquez was charged with the murder of LeAnne Martinez and held without bond at the Taos County Jail until his trial. Although one case had been solved, investigators were still on the hunt for Marioara's murderer. But a mystery tip was about to take them back to the very beginning.
911 emergency.
Okay, I wanted to report somebody.
Okay, what's going on?
I heard about that lady that was murdered in Rancho.
Yeah.
And
As LeAnne's case came to a close, the New Mexico State Police received a call regarding information about Marioara's murder.
Wanting to remain anonymous, the caller named a name that the investigators had not heard since the beginning of their investigation.
Okay. Nathaniel Duran, I came in full of blood.
And do you know he was seen at the scene where this happened?
Well, he lives right next door.
After making a statement, he ended the call. The name Nathaniel sounded familiar to investigators, and they soon realized he was the grandson of Marioara's landlord, Edward. He was also the person who provided police with Mitchell Rhodes's name at the outset. Through phone records, they were able to track down the caller, and he agreed to speak with investigators on condition his name remained anonymous. At the station, the informant told officers that Nathaniel had called him on the evening of July 6, 2002, requesting a ride. He went on to tell investigators what he observed in Nathaniel's appearance and behavior.
If I could come and pick him up, I noticed something was wrong with him, that he was shaking about something. I asked him what was going on. At first, he didn't want to talk about it until I finally told him that there's nothing he can't say to me. Me and him have been together for many years together. We shared everything together. Okay. I asked him again what was going on. He told me that he did something bad to his girl. He had hurt some girl. I asked her if she's dead, is she okay? He told me that he stabbed her 8 times, he said. In the neck, he told me. And did he say why? I asked him why. He said it was the devil in him. I asked him if he was doing any cocaine, any kind of drugs. He says, yeah, that he was high.
After the interview, investigators believed they'd found their strongest lead yet in Marioara's case. The anonymous informant had provided details only the killer would know about. Investigators also realized that the lack of forced entry into Marioara's apartment also pointed towards Nathaniel as their prime suspect. A search warrant was executed on Nathaniel's home, and a pair of shoes that seemed to match the shoe prints found at the murder scene was taken as evidence. Nathaniel was taken to the police station for further questioning and was asked to provide a DNA sample. He appeared nervous during questioning and tried to distance himself from the murderer by either claiming to be in another part of the city when Marioara was murdered or by telling officers he had nothing to hide.
When will these results come back? Because, you know what I mean?
Oh, no, I understand. They come back pretty fast. He did voluntarily give a DNA sample, but he was very nervous as we were getting that sample.
Let me get a picture of the other side of your hands before we're done, because I didn't get that before we started. Are you right-handed or left-handed?
I am right-handed.
Right-handed. Mm-hmm. Do you have any knives?
No.
No. Do you carry any knives?
No.
Ever?
Nah. When I'm in the mountains.
Yeah.
And most of the time they're not even mine.
So you never carry a knife? Never have?
Mm-hmm.
On the palm of his right hand, he had a cut.
When did you cut your hand?
Just now earlier in the morning.
Oh. Oh, I already sliced it up pretty good.
And when questioned about that cut, he stated that he had cut it on some rocks.
What were you doing on July 6th through the 7th?
What days were those?
That would have been on a Saturday through Sunday.
This last week?
Yeah, we found Miss Shand on the 9th.
I was in Penasco.
You were in Penasco?
Yes, sir.
Well, we've collected some evidence, and what we'd like to do, we want to eliminate you. You know, of course, if you're not guilty, we want to eliminate you and start processing or looking at other suspects.
I have nothing to worry about, you know what I mean? Like, otherwise, if I had something to worry about, I would sure not be coming to state police office.
Right.
So,
No, we appreciate you coming in.
But when he realized he was cornered, he told officers that he wanted to speak to a lawyer before answering any more questions.
Daniel, let me just tell you, the Sheriff's Department and I are working for quite a while on all these cases, okay? Mm-hmm. Thus far, it shows that you are responsible. Now, hold on. Let me just tell you what's leading us up to this conclusion, okay?
I just kind of tried to point this on me, bro.
Nathaniel, it's not even a question of whether you did or you didn't. You did. It was an accident, wasn't it? Nathaniel? It was an accident, wasn't it?
No, nothing else to say.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and conclude the interview. The time is 12:45.
Nathaniel's DNA was tested against the sample collected from Marioara's body and came back as a positive match. He was arrested and charged for the murder of Marioara Shand. In December 2003, Nathaniel Duran went on trial for the assault and murder of Marioara Shand. At trial, Nathaniel maintained his innocence. In his defense, Nathaniel alleged that he'd visited Marioara on July 6, 2002, and she'd invited him into the apartment. After speaking for a while, they engaged in consensual intimacy. Nathaniel claimed that Marioara was alive when he left and that she'd been murdered sometime after that. The jury didn't believe his argument, and he was convicted of the murder and assault of Marioara Shand. He was sentenced to life in prison and given an additional 10.5 years to be served at the penitentiary of New Mexico. According to reports, Nathaniel ripped off his shirt and shouted obscenities at the judge after being sentenced. He had to be escorted out of court by force. In January 2004, Richard Fresquez had his day in court. In his defense, Richard alleged that he and LeAnne had engaged in consensual intimacy but ended up having a heated argument afterwards. Richard said that the fight had escalated and he'd lost control and ended up stabbing LeAnne to death. He stated that it was an accident and not premeditated or intentional. However, the jury didn't believe his claims, and after 3.5 hours of deliberation, convicted him on all charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison at the penitentiary of New Mexico with a possibility of parole after 30 years. Despite several appeals, Richard remains incarcerated. On January 21, 2008, Nathaniel Duran was found dead in his cell after ending his own life by hanging himself with a bedsheet. For Marioara's friends, her death had taken with it the brightest of life. To this day, Marioara is remembered for her free-spirited personality, and her friends wonder where it would have taken her had she still been alive. For LeAnne's family, they cannot reconcile the unfairness of life and how hers had been snatched away just as she was beginning to live. It's harder still for her daughter, Estrella.
Richard Fresquez is a monster. I think that he deserves to live his life in complete and total and utter misery.
He took a beautiful, bright, funny woman from this world who had just started her life. She had just barely begun.
The cases of both Marioara and LeAnne prove that safety is not something we should take for granted.
I don't have memories of her. I don't know how my mother's voice sounds. I really don't remember anything about her. She was killed at 22, and I'm about to be 21. Each birthday just hurts more and more, knowing that she will always be stuck at an age that I'm now past.
Even within the confines of our own homes, we can become a killer's target. So, looking back at today's case, we'd like for you to share your thoughts and opinions with us. Do we really know the people living among us? And where can we ever feel safe and content if not in our own homes? Let us know in the comment section below. And if you found today's video interesting, please consider subscribing to M7 Crime Storytime, hit the like button, and share our videos with other crime aficionados. Also, if you have any crime story that you'd like us to cover, leave us a message in the comment section below. Until next time, stay safe.